Read it. Richard Hargrove leaned back in his chair and held a single sheet of paper above his head. His laugh filled the boardroom the way it always filled rooms, loud, certain, designed to tell everyone present exactly who owned the air. Around the mahogany table, 6 executives smiled on cue. 2 covered their mouths. 1 leaned toward a colleague and said something quiet that made the other look down to hide a grin. Chicago, March 14th, 2019. 43rd floor. Hargrove Industries headquarters, with the city pressed against floor-to-ceiling glass, and the street below could not hear a single word. Since Miss Chun has been so quiet this morning, Richard slid the paper down the length of the table. Perhaps she can be useful for once. The letter passed 3 laptops, 2 untouched water glasses, and a leather portfolio before stopping at the far end. Maya Chun, 29 years old, junior financial analyst, white blouse, dark hair pulled back. She had sat at that end of the table for 41 minutes without a single person speaking to her directly. She looked at the paper but did not reach for it. Richard spread his arms wide. It's written in some kind of foreign language. Nobody here can read it. But if you can, if you actually read this aloud and explain what it says, I will personally wire you $1 million before this meeting ends. The room responded exactly as he intended. Comfortable, easy laughter from people who had never once considered that the quiet woman at the far end of the table was anything other than background. Maya picked up the letter. She studied it for 4 seconds. Then she stood. Stay with us. Because what came out of her mouth next didn't just silence that room. It unraveled something a powerful man had spent 30 years hiding. Subscribe and don't look away. But that boardroom, that letter, that silence, did not begin in March of 2019. It began 31 years earlier, in a different kind of room entirely. Detroit, 1988. 3rd floor of a manufacturing plant on the east side of the city, where the floor smelled like machine oil and the lights hummed at a frequency that gave you a headache by Thursday. Hideo Chun, who went by Henry in American offices because his managers struggled with pronunciation, was 34 years old and had been in this country for 8 years. He had arrived from Osaka with a master's degree in process engineering and a composition notebook filled with thermal design calculations that no American manufacturer had attempted commercially. He was the kind of man who stayed late because the problem still was not solved, not because anyone was watching. In the winter of 1988, Henry developed a thermal bonding process that cut industrial manufacturing costs by 38%. He documented every stage in Japanese, his habits since graduate school, and submitted a formal patent application through Hargrove Industrial Partners in January 1989. The application was received, acknowledged in writing, stamped and filed. 6 months later, the company filed a nearly identical patent under a different name. Henry confronted the patent attorney. He was dismissed within the week, performance concerns, attitude problems, and handed 2 weeks of severance and a non-disclosure agreement he signed because he had a wife, a 2-year-old daughter named Maya, and no money left to fight with. He spent 17 years in smaller jobs and smaller cities. He filed 3 formal complaints over 2 decades. Each one was buried or returned without response. He died in 2015 at 61, from a heart that had been quietly failing since the morning he cleaned out his desk in August 1989. Maya was 25 when her father died. She had spent years watching him read documents at the kitchen table with a sadness he could never name. She applied to Hargrove Industries for 18 months, interviewed 4 times, accepted a salary 30% below her qualifications. She had been inside this building for 22 months, searching quietly and finding nothing, until the night before this meeting, when an automated archive migration deposited a sealed 30-year-old folder onto the company's shared legal drive, untouched for 3 decades. And someone had placed it exactly where Maya Chun would find it first. Maya had not slept. She had found the folder at 11:47 the previous evening, still sitting at her kitchen table with a cold cup of tea and her laptop screen casting blue light across her father's old composition notebook. The archive contained scanned originals, patent filings, internal correspondence, engineering assessments from 1989 through 1991. She read through 47 documents in 4 hours, and at 3:14 in the morning, she found it. her father's original application, his handwriting, his signature, his name printed clearly at the top of the cover page. Hideo Chun, inventor, January 17, 1989. Behind it was something worse, an internal memo from Gordon Hale, co-founder of the original company before Richard restructured it, dated September 1989. Gordon had written to Richard directly. He had objected to the company's patent filing. He had noted in precise, careful language that the application was derivative of what he called the Chun submission. At the bottom of that memo, in handwriting Maya recognized from a dozen company documents, Richard Hargrove had replied in 3 words, "Handle it quietly." She photographed every page before the company's IT system auto-restricted the migrated folder at 6 in the morning. She had 49 photographs on her personal phone when she sat in her car outside the building at 7:48. Engine off, hands on the steering wheel. She sat there for 11 minutes. She had the evidence. She had the photographs. She had her father's composition notebook in her bag, the one she had carried out of his apartment after the funeral without fully understanding why. What she did not have was a plan. She went inside anyway. The board meeting began at 9. It was a quarterly review of the company's flagship product line, the thermal bonding technology that now generated $2.3 billion annually. Richard presented its development history in 3 slides. Precise, polished, rehearsed. The senior patent attorney in the corner did not look at the slides once. Maya asked a single technical question about the original development timeline. Richard answered without pausing. She did not follow up. At 10:22, a male clerk entered through the side door with an interoffice envelope. Richard opened it without looking up. He turned the single handwritten page over twice. His expression moved from confusion to amusement. He looked around the table. Then his eyes found Maya at the far end. If you're still watching, you already know this moment is about to break open. Subscribe before the next section, because what Maya does in the next 60 seconds cost Richard Hargrove 30 years of silence. Maya picked up the letter, looked at the first line, and her hands went completely still, because she had seen this handwriting before. Every morning, at a kitchen table, since she was 3 years old. For seconds, that was how long Maya held the letter before she spoke. Long enough for Richard to smile at the executive beside him. Long enough for someone near the window to clear his throat. Long enough for the entire room to settle into the comfortable assumption that they were about to watch a young woman fail gracefully in front of people who had already decided she was irrelevant. She stood up. She did not ask permission. She did not glance toward Richard for approval or signal to anyone at the table that she was about to do something they should prepare for. In a room where junior analysts did not stand without being invited, the act alone stopped 3 private conversations cold. She read the Japanese aloud first. Slowly, the Osaka dialect her father had used at the kitchen table when he thought she was asleep. Her pronunciation was not approximate. It was not careful or studied, or the kind of Japanese someone learns from an application. It was the language of a child who grew up hearing it in the dark, carried into adulthood without ever choosing to let it go. Nobody in the room laughed this time. Then she translated, line by line, without hurry. This is a patent application for a thermal industrial bonding process, filed January 17, 1989. Inventor Hideo Chun. The process achieves a 38% reduction in thermal loss during stage 3 manufacturing cycles. She placed the letter flat on the table and opened her phone. Before the meeting began that morning, she had connected her device to the boardroom display without anyone noticing. The archived photographs appeared on the screen at the front of the room. Her father's original application, his signature, the acknowledgement stamp dated March 3, 1989. This is the same process, filed 6 months later under a different name by Hargrove Industrial Partners. United States Patent Number 4892107. Approved March 1990. She pulled up the Gordon Hale memo. The room read Richard's handwriting before he could speak. Handle it quietly. 3 executives reached for their phones simultaneously. The patent attorney in the corner stopped writing mid-sentence and did not move again. At the far end of the table, Walter Crane, 72 years old, original engineer from the company's first decade, slowly pushed his chair back from the table. He stood without urgency, The way a man stands when he has been expecting something for a very long time and feels no satisfaction in its arrival. He walked toward the door without looking at Richard. He stopped with one hand on the frame. He spoke without turning around. "I told you this day would come." The door closed behind him. Richard did not collapse. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Maya with the cold, recalibrating expression of a man who has survived worse surprises than this and knows exactly which lever to reach for. "Those documents are unverified." He looked at his general counsel. "Anyone can manufacture digital scans. This meeting is over." Maya did not argue. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her jacket pocket. She picked up her bag. She looked at Richard one final time. "My father wrote his application in Japanese because he trusted this company to protect it. Someone sent this letter here this morning. Someone who has been carrying this for 30 years. She buttoned her jacket. "I don't think they're waiting anymore." She walked toward the elevator. Her phone rang before she reached the doors. "Unknown number." She answered. An elderly man's voice, careful and slow, came through the line. "Miss Chun, my name is Gordon Hale. I have been watching this building for a very long time, and there is something I need to tell you about the morning your father was fired. Something that was never in any document." The elevator doors opened. Maya stepped inside. The doors closed. Gordon Hale was 83 years old and had not used his real name in 18 years. He had not died in 2003 the way the company's official history recorded. He had simply disappeared, quietly, legally, and at Richard Hargrove's direct arrangement, following a private settlement in 2001 that required his permanent silence, his public exit, and his signature on a document that made him a ghost by choice. He had been living in Portland under a shortened name, in a house near a park, with a garden he tended every morning and a folder he had been carrying for 30 years, without knowing who to give it to. His son had found Maya's name 3 months earlier inside a federal IP filing connected to a routine legal search. He told his father. Gordon had spent those 3 months preparing. He met Maya at a coffee shop near Union Station that afternoon. He arrived before her, already seated, already watching the door. He was thin and slow-moving and carried a worn leather folder against his chest the way a man carries something he does not intend to put down until he is certain of the hands receiving it. He placed it on the table between them without preamble. Inside were 2 documents. The first was the original copy of Henry Chen's patent acknowledgement, signed in Richard Hargrove's own hand in February of 1989, a full month before the company claimed it had no record of any Chen application. The second was a letter Gordon himself had written to the full board in 1990, formally objecting to the U.S. patent filing and naming Henry Chen explicitly as the originating inventor. The board had ordered it destroyed. Gordon had kept a photocopy beneath the floorboards of his office for 11 years before the settlement forced him out. Then Gordon leaned forward. Richard had not stolen blindly from a stranger. He had known Henry personally. They had worked in the same building for 2 years. Richard had seen every stage of the thermal process developed in real time, had reviewed early design notes informally, had once told Henry over a lunch in the company cafeteria that the process was going to change the entire industry. When investors pressured the company for a patent to anchor the product line, Richard made a calculation. Henry Chen was a foreign-born engineer with no capital, no legal connections, and a non-disclosure agreement already waiting in an HR drawer. The calculation was simple. The theft was not impulsive. It was decided. Gordon looked at the composition notebook Maya placed on the table. He was quiet for a long moment. "That notebook," he said, "predates the application by 8 months. It shows every development stage in sequence. No attorney can argue with a dated engineering notebook in the inventor's own hand. That notebook ends this. If you have stayed this far, you already understand what is coming. Subscribe now, because what arrives at Maya's apartment that night changes the shape of everything she thought she already knew." She slid the photograph across the table last. Gordon stared at it without speaking. 1989, a factory floor. 2 men standing over a set of blueprints, both of them smiling the way people smile when they believe in something together. Henry Chun on the left, Richard Hargrove on the right, and written across the top of the blueprints in her father's unmistakable handwriting, for words that made the theft not just criminal but personal. Our process. Our future. Maya did not call a lawyer first. She called a journalist. By 6 that evening, a Chicago Tribune technology reporter had the complete document package: the original patent application, the Gordon Hale memo, Richard's handwritten instruction, the board letter Gordon had hidden for 11 years, the composition notebook, and the photograph of two men standing over a blueprint with 4 words written across the top in a dead man's handwriting. The reporter spent 2 hours verifying. She called Hargrove Industries Communications office at 8:45 for comment. They requested 48 hours. She published at 9 the following morning. Hargrove Industries stock dropped 11% before noon. Richard called Maya personally at 10:17. His voice was measured, almost gentle, the way a man sounds when he has rehearsed composure over decades of difficult rooms. He offered a private settlement, significant compensation, a carefully worded public acknowledgement of Henry Chen's contribution to the company's early development. No admission of wrongdoing. No court filing. Clean, quiet, and permanent. Maya listened to every word without interrupting. Then she said, "My father signed a non-disclosure agreement in 1989 because he had no choice and no voice, and no one in that building willing to stand beside him." She paused. He spent the rest of his life believing that silence was the only thing the agreement had given him. She picked up the composition notebook from the table beside her. He was wrong. He left me his. She ended the call. 3 board members issued a joint statement before the afternoon ended, calling for an independent investigation. 2 institutional shareholders froze their Hargrove holdings. The patent attorney who had processed the 1989 filing, now retired in Scottsdale, Arizona, contacted a federal intellectual property attorney voluntarily before the week was out. The structure Richard had spent 30 years reinforcing began separating at every joint simultaneously. That night, a package arrived at Maya's apartment. Inside the envelope was a single handwritten note. No signature. "Your father sent copies of his notebook to 3 places before he died. You have found one. There are 2 more. One is already in federal hands. The other, he sent to you when you were 7 years old. You just haven't found it yet." She found it 14 months later. Not in a storage box. Not inside a filing cabinet or a forgotten drawer. It was inside a children's book. A worn paperback copy of a Japanese folktale Henry had read to her every night when she was small. She had carried it through 4 apartments across 2 cities without ever opening it as an adult. The composition notebook pages were folded flat against the back cover, pressed there so carefully they had become part of the binding. He had hidden them in the one place he knew she would never throw away. Federal investigators reopened the patent case in full. United States Patent Number 4892107 was invalidated 14 months after the boardroom. Richard Hargrove settled personally, not through the company, for an amount the court sealed but described in its summary as substantial. He resigned from the board in December 2019. Gordon Hale testified. Walter Crane testified. The patent attorney in Scottsdale testified. One by one, people who had chosen silence for 30 years discovered that silence had simply been waiting for the right morning to end. Maya established the Henry Chen Process Engineering Scholarship, awarded annually to first-generation immigrant engineering students at 3 Midwest universities. The original composition notebook now lives in the Smithsonian's Innovation Collection. Gordon Hale attended the donation ceremony. He did not give a speech. He held the notebook for a moment before placing it in the archivist's hands. Then he sat down and was quiet for a long time. Maya visited her father's grave on a Tuesday in February. No occasion, just a Tuesday. She brought the photograph. 2 men, 1 blueprint, 4 words. She stood there without speaking for a while. Then she said, "They mocked the letter, Dad. They thought it was nothing. They didn't know you wrote it." The most dangerous assumption a powerful person can make is that the person sitting quietly across the table has nothing left. Henry Chen had a language, a notebook, and a daughter who inherited both. He simply ran out of time before the right morning came. Maya did not. And sometimes 30 years is exactly long enough for the truth to find a room it was always meant to enter. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were Maya in that boardroom?